Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Oh my goodness, we have so much to talk about today, my friends. Welcome to Resistance Live for the 26th of March, 2024. It's ECM. I'm coming to you, as always, from occupied, unceded Tongva territory, also known as Southern California. And today, for our visually challenged viewers, I am wearing a black top with a black blazer over top. I'm channeling Rachel Maddow in my wardrobe today. I am a pink-skinned, green-eyed, dirty, blonde-haired woman. I have my thick gold hoops in. I'm in front of a plant and a lamp and a cushy chair. And I don't know if you're in the same boat I am, but I truly feel like the last day has been absolutely wild. Like, I truly cannot believe how much breaking news we've had over the course of the last 24 hours. So we're going to start with the oral argument in front of the Supreme Court that just ended, literally just ended minutes ago. And this is the case that came out of Texas, that originally was decided by a Trump-appointed judge, the very far-right Trump-appointed judge in Texas, who has ruled on this case and quite a number of others, completely defying the law, completely defying precedent, very much an ideological judge. This then went up to the Fifth Circuit and then now has landed at the Supreme Court. This is a case where an association of doctors, and we learned today dentists, have challenged the FDA's approval of mifepristone, one of the drugs that is used in medicated abortion procedures. And in essence, this is an attempt not only to challenge the use of mifepristone nationwide and to challenge the authority of the FDA to regulate abortion drugs, this abortion drug in particular, but also raises the specter of whether or not national transportation of abortion drugs violates the Comstock Act. Now, those of you who have been here for a very, very, very long time have heard me talk about the Comstock Act before, which is historically an act that has been used to ban the transportation of lewd materials or anything that could cause an abortion over state lines. The Comstock Act has not been used in any way, shape, or form to ban abortion pills for a century, I think. And now it's attempting to be revived for the purposes of keeping mifepristone to be able to send through the mail. Yes, dentists. I mean, this is how crazy this is. All right. So we had an oral argument in front of the Supreme Court this morning. And here's the good news. The good news is that the issue of standing appears to be taking precedence in the way in which the justices are looking at this case. Again, for those of you who have been here for a very long time, last 7 years, you've heard me talk over and over again about the doctrine of standing. Essentially what the doctrine of standing means, and this is one of those things they teach you in your very first weeks of law school, is that you have to have an injury that you can document to the court in order to have standing to bring a claim. Okay, so here we have this association made up of doctors who, as Justice Jackson Justice Jackson pointed out this morning in front of the Supreme Court, are alleging what is essentially a completely hypothetical injury, that at some moment, some person with a uterus who has taken mifepristone may experience a side effect, show up in an emergency room, and then have to have an abortion, a more traditional surgical abortion, in order to complete the abortion procedure. All right. There's apparently one doctor in this whole mix who has been presented with this exact scenario, but mifepristone is one of the safest drugs registered and monitored by the FDA. In fact, as someone pointed out this morning, Viagra has a 15 times higher death rate than mifepristone. And I just point that out because, we all know what's going on here. And we all know that what's really underway here is an attempt to regulate the bodies of women and people with uteruses to keep them under the thumb of white supremacist patriarchy. Let's just not make any bones about it. The good news is that 8 of the 9 justices, Justice Alito, who just makes me mental, being the lone exception, seem to be of the opinion that this particular association does not have standing to challenge the regulation of this drug. And that, by the way, is absolutely the right call. And it was a really weird moment today because Justice Jackson was pointing this out. Gorsuch came to Jackson's defense. Justice Thomas started out the argument by asking questions about whether or not there was a legitimate issue of standing here. And so, I will just tell you again, this is all tea leaf reading because we're not going to know what the ruling is until the court's opinion comes out at the end of the term, which could be as late as the end of June. But the tea leaf reading here is that, and I watched a little bit of coverage after the oral argument itself. Neil Katyal and I happen to be in agreement. This looks like at least 8 of the justices are not going to agree that this association has standing to challenge the FDA's regulation of mifepristone. The larger consideration here, which everybody should be aware of, is that there are overarching considerations here about what it would mean to allow courts to challenge the FDA's regulation of drugs. And questions were asked, very legitimate questions, about whether or not, like, judges know better than the FDA about whether or not a given drug is safe. I also have to say that some of the allegations that were made by this association and their attorneys, more on that in a minute, sound just completely specious to me. This idea that like tens of thousands of women have had horrific side effects from mifepristone. Again, even the studies that they were citing in their briefs were challenged this morning in front of the Supreme Court. So this did not go particularly well for the association itself. But if you need another indication of where all of this is coming from, the attorney who argued on behalf of the association is, wait for it, Senator Josh Hawley's wife. Okay, so anybody who needs an understanding of the ideological makeup of this particular argument and this particular, by the way, created litigation, because I just want to make it really clear, this is not a situation where, a couple of doctors randomly decided that they were going to challenge the FDA's regulation of mifepristone. This is an engineered case designed to take mifepristone off the market by the far right and white Christian nationalists. So everybody needs to get really clear on the fact that this is not a legitimate lawsuit. And for all the reasons that were discussed this morning around standing, my hope is that the Supreme Court, maybe by an 8-1 decision, is going to boot this one on the issue of standing, and then we'll see what happens. Now, there are some concerns here, because one of the things that was asked this morning is, well, if these guys don't have, by the conservative justices, if this association doesn't have standing to bring this case, who would? And again, I have to remind everybody that Thomas has invited cases that challenge gay marriage, has invited cases that challenge Griswold, the case that about access to birth control. Like, they know who it is who is trying to bring these cases, and they are inviting cases that will get around this standing issue. Okay, the one is Justice Alito. So again, I have to tell you that I don't think this case is going to end well for the people who brought it, and at the same time, no one should be under the illusion that this is a sign that this conservative majority isn't going to be looking for another way to accomplish this. So there were lots of moments that were appalling. I have to say that the language being used about like a post-abortion DNC this morning was enough to kind of really like enrage me. But I will just tell you all that I think we've got a future challenges coming on these issues that are going to be very much harder to dismiss. All right. And this is yet another reason why the election matters so much in November, because we have some of these Supreme Court justices who are approaching the age that they could potentially retire. And we've got to have a Democratic president and a Democratic Senate to make sure that those seats are filled with young, progressive, qualified candidates. All right. It's a big deal. All right. I have to talk about what happened at Diddy's various homes this morning, because for those of you who haven't been following this is actually a really significant set of events. So many of you were here back when Dream Hampton's incredible documentary on R. Kelly called Surviving R. Kelly came out. And we spent, many broadcasts over many weeks talking about how appalling it was that for years and years and years and years and years, R. Kelly had been, and I have to do a trigger warning here, we're going to talk about sexual violence. If this is something that you don't want to hear, please just silence the broadcast for a little bit and, or skip over it if you're watching the replay. So this is your moment, okay? About the fact that R. Kelly had been sexually abusing teenage girls and young women for like decades, and had gotten away with it over and over and over again. This situation with P. Diddy is shaping up to be extraordinarily similar to that. So let me explain what happened yesterday in the context of how this whole story began to break. So an R&B singer by the name of Cassie brought a lawsuit against Diddy last November. And the lawsuit alleged that since 2005 until 2019, she had essentially been sexually trafficked by Diddy and raped, repeatedly sexually assaulted, forced to have sex with male prostitutes to entertain him, videotaped, been subjected to revenge porn, been drugged. And it was an incredibly devastating set of allegations, to the point that it was literally settled after one day. And the interesting thing about that was that it opened the door then to a number of other people coming forward, both women and one man, alleging that Diddy had been engaged in similar sorts of conduct with them. Okay. Where we are now, as of yesterday, that has made all of this much more, brought it much more to the front of the public consciousness. All right. Because those of us who pay attention to these sorts of things and who have spent a while, I mean, you all know that I did human rights litigation related to women who were sex trafficked and forced to be sex slaves for purposes of the Japanese military during World War II. And I've been very conscious ever since I handled that case more than 23 years ago now, of the way in which racially marginalized and marginalized people generally are ignored in the context of these sort of mass trafficking allegations in a way that often, not always, but often, white women are not, right? We take the allegations involving white victims much more seriously than we tend to take allegations against Black women and girls. This situation with Diddy is extremely troubling because yesterday what happened was that 3 of his homes were raided simultaneously by the Department of Homeland Security. Now, you may be wondering why it is that the Department of Homeland Security would be involved in raiding Diddy's houses all at the same time. Here's why. The Department of Homeland Security has authority over international and multi-state sex trafficking allegations. We now know that there are at least 5 cooperating witnesses with DHS, 4 of whom are women. The suspicion is that these are the people who have already come forward and made allegations related to Diddy. But I'm just going to say this from a legal standpoint. You do not end up with 3 simultaneous search warrants involving hundreds of FBI agents with guns drawn, executed simultaneously in 3 different jurisdictions, if there is not an inordinate amount of probable cause, let alone concerns about evidence being destroyed and people fleeing at stake. Okay. So yesterday, we had the discovery that Diddy's jet, which is named like Love Air, this will give you all Epstein blowback, right, was located in Antigua. Nobody seems to know right now where Diddy is. And I have to say that on top of this, this continues to smack also of the allegations against Russell Simmons. Now, many of you know I interviewed Drew Dixon, who was one of the women who was raped by Russell Simmons, on my podcast last year. She's a friend, incredible survivor, and also played an astonishing role in the discovery of people like Mary J. Blige and John Legend, and, you know, was a hip hop executive whose career was fundamentally ended by Russell Simmons as a result of what she experienced. Well, Russell Simmons, after a whole series of allegations, fled to Bali. He was served with papers yesterday in Bali. So we're seeing a real kind of like, I think Lovey described it yesterday as a flipping of the table, a moment where there is a real reckoning coming for hip hop. And I want everyone to be mindful of this, because it is very easy, because of the culture that we live in and because of the omnipresent nature of white supremacy, to dismiss these allegations or say that we don't need to pay attention to this because we don't care about hip hop. If that's you, I care about hip hop. But you know that it's much easier because white folks have been indoctrinated into this idea that we don't have to pay attention to what's happening in Black culture, when the opposite is obviously true due to the nature of white supremacy. I'm just going to tell you all, you need to pay attention to this. You need to pay attention to this story, because this is looking an awful lot like an Epstein of hip hop kind of moment. We're talking decades of sex trafficking and abuse of Black women and girls and young men. And I am really very convinced at this point that we only know the tip of the iceberg of what is actually going on here. So, you know, there were allegations in Cassie's lawsuit that he had blown up a rapper's car in his driveway for having had a relationship with Cassie in the early teens. There are allegations that he hung one of her friends off a balcony of a skyscraper to manage to maintain control over her. So people really need to be very clear that this is a story that matters. And I would feel remiss if I didn't come on here and talk about it, because the significance of it, the fact that no one has come forward to say that they don't believe Diddy could have done any of this. I'm just going to mention, by the way, that Cuba Gooding Jr. is now wrapped up in these allegations as well. I think we're going to see the veil really pulled back on something here that is going to be very ugly and very disturbing. And we're only at the very beginning of the legal processes in relation to this. So it's really critical that people are conscious of this story. And also, I have to say that Cassie, as the first woman who came forward in a very brave move and was only able to do it thanks to the New York Survivors Act. Many of you will remember we had people in this audience who are a part of getting that passed in New York State, which allowed for the statute of limitations for survivors of sexual abuse to have a 1-year window. This is also how E. Jean Carroll was able to bring her case, to bring past allegations of sexual assault and trauma in court in New York. That is how Cassie was able to bring her case as well. But I want you to think about what it takes to be someone who was trafficked for 14 years by one of the most powerful men in hip hop and in music generally, and to be the first person to stand up and come forward with these kind of allegations, the kind of courage that it took for her to do that, and really what it has meant between November and now in terms of what may have been revealed. So everyone should be very thoughtful about this. We do not know where he is right now. We do not know where he is. And even though his jet is in Antigua, nobody seems to know where Diddy is. There was some speculation yesterday that he'd been arrested in Miami. That has not been confirmed. All right. 2 of his sons were at least handcuffed. We do not know whether or not they were arrested. So again, I want everybody to just get clear about all of this and make sure that you are not doing the kind of indoctrinated white supremacy thing of ignoring this case because it involves Black women and girls and young men. All right. This one deserves as much attention as Epstein, as did R. Kelly. And one of the reasons why men get away with these things for so long when the violence is perpetrated against Black women and girls and young men is because of society's generalized perspective that certain lives are disposable and others are not. So I'm really angry about it, honestly. And I want everybody who watches this broadcast to be aware of what is being alleged here and what is going on. 50 Cent did say he wasn't surprised at all. And actually 50 Cent is now apparently doing a documentary on the allegations against Diddy where all the profits will go to victims of rape and sexual assault. So it's a wild story. And I have to say that also I'm keeping an eye on what's going on with Russell Simmons because he ran out of the country to escape liability for 13 separate allegations of rape. Rather, it's more than that, 13 women coming forward to allege that he raped them. So it's quite a lot. Okay. I need to clarify. Well, let's talk about Ken Paxton first. So Ken Paxton has settled the securities fraud charges against him in Texas. This news broke about 2 hours ago. And it involves the payment of restitution. Now, I have very serious questions about why he's not being prosecuted. We all know that he was already attempted to be impeached by the Texas legislature, and he won that last year. You all remember we covered that live here on the air. Ken Paxton has apparently agreed to settle the securities fraud charges for $300,000 in restitution and a certain number of hours of community service. I have to say that, as with everything else related to Ken Paxton, it smacks of corruption. And I feel very deeply for all the people in Texas who are being subjected to persecution by Ken Paxton. Let's not forget that he's the person who's investigating the parents of trans children and said that Kate Cox and her husband would be arrested if they sought abortion care in Texas or left the state to get it, right? That's this guy. And meanwhile, he himself has been engaged in corrupt activity in securities fraud, and now he's going to pay a $300,000 fine and essentially walk. It's disturbing. It's very disturbing. Don't get me wrong. And I'm going to remind you all, Texas is voter suppressed. We have an enormous effort to change the Texas legislature underway right now in the state. It is profoundly important that if you live in Texas, or you know people in Texas, or you just want to help in Texas, that you do your very best to make sure that the correct candidates are being elected to the state legislature. It is a massively voter suppressed state. Texas needs all the help it can get. I have staff members in Texas in Austin, in Dallas. I have trans friends who live in Texas. This is like there's such a dire need to flip Texas to actually benefit the vast majority of the people who live there. Texas is not a red state. It is a voter suppressed state. And so I don't want anybody blaming the voters of Texas for where we've ended up. All right. It is a profoundly corrupt government leadership from the top down. And we desperately need to make sure that people are mobilizing in Texas to toss out this incredibly corrupt attorney general, but also, I mean, my God, the governor. Let's not forget everything that's happening at the border right now as well. Okay. So I want to clarify a couple of things about Trump's bond, because this morning on the Patreon feed, by the way, if you are not yet a paid subscriber over at patreon.com/resistancelive, you can become a paid subscriber by going over to this link. It starts at as little as $2 a month. That's less than 10 cents a broadcast. And you can ask me questions for 2 hours in advance of every broadcast, and I will answer them live on the air. You also get to join our Sunday Progressive Coffee Hour, which is only for members of Resistance Live over on Patreon. And you get other perks if your subscription is higher than that. Okay. So please go check it out if you haven't yet already. We have a lot of new Patreon subscribers over there. Many, many thanks to those of you who are new. And I want everybody to kind of like understand as well that your paid support of this work is what allows me to do this work 6 days a week and still support my kids and pay my staff behind the scenes who help us out. So please consider it like a donation to PBS or NPR if this broadcast is serving you. All right. This morning on Patreon, we had a question that, a couple of questions actually, that seem to indicate that there's still a misunderstanding about the bond reduction related to Trump that came down yesterday. So I just want to make it really clear for everyone. We have a lot of new subscribers and followers here. Let me just make this all very clear. Okay. The judgment itself has not been reduced. Trump still owes almost $500 million in damages. The judgment has not been touched, okay? What happened was that a 5-court appeals court in New York State reduced the amount of bond he has to put up to secure his appeal rights. It did not change the amount that he owes in total, okay? So I want everybody to understand this. Like, we don't know what would happen on appeal. We don't even know if he would end up with the same judicial panel. But I'm just going to say this, okay? People need to get really clear on the facts here, because there's a lot of fear mongering out there right now that Trump has gotten completely off the hook. And that is false. Okay. I'm not pleased with the decision. You can go back and watch what I said yesterday about it on yesterday's broadcast. But I also just want people to like deal with the actual facts. Okay. He still owes $500 million. If he loses on appeal, which is highly likely, he's still going to owe that money. And I still have very serious questions about whether or not he's even going to be able to post a bond of $175 million because he's broke. So it's very key that folks understand this. Somebody also asked a question about like, how do bond companies work? Ordinarily, you pay them. I mean, it varies from bond company to bond company, but ordinarily you pay an exorbitant amount on top of the bond that they put up. And they get paid that fee regardless. So it can be like as high as 20%. And, some of these bond companies are really usurious. A lot of exploitation goes on with people who are poor, who can't make bond and end up in prison. By the way, this morning, Trump is ranting about Rikers Island. I'm just going to point out that he's very clearly very afraid of going to prison in New York. So in any event, I want the facts of this to be very, very clear about what has actually happened and what hasn't. All right. Then there is the criminal case in New York City. This is the case where yesterday, live on the air, we found out that there was a trial date of April 15th. Jury selection is starting on April 15th in New York City. Judge Juan Merchan didn't even want to hear it when Trump's people were like, we're going to appeal this. He was like, fine, I'll see you on April 15th. Right? There's not going to be a delay in this trial, I don't think. All right. I think it would be extremely unlikely. And what that means is that Trump is going to be facing down 34 felony counts of fraudulent document production designed to interfere in the 2016 election. Again, this is about the payoff to Stormy Daniels, the payoff to another Playboy Playmate, the National Enquirer, David Pecker, Michael Cohen. This is that entire scheme of election interference to suppress bad stories about Trump in advance of the 2016 election in the wake of the Access Hollywood tape. Now, each one of those counts, because I was asked to look at this again by someone on the Patreon feed a couple of days ago, and it took me a while because, I do a lot of legal research for this broadcast. But let me just tell you what it is that he's facing down here. Okay, so this is the bad news. There is no minimum sentence. because we've talked a lot about sentencing guidelines here, right? For some crimes under state or federal law, may vary depending on the state, there are what are called sentencing guidelines. These are guidelines that judges must apply when they are sentencing people who have been convicted of that crime, all right? For some crimes, there are mandatory minimums, right? You must serve a minimum of 10 years in prison if you commit second-degree murder, all the way up to life, okay? It depends on the state's laws. Here, there is no mandatory minimum for the class of felonies that Donald Trump has been alleged to have committed. However, there is a maximum sentence for each one of these felonies of 4 years, all right? So that means, you do the math, 34 times 4, if he is required to serve them consecutively, would be the end of his life. And I'm just going to point out as well that we've got anywhere in the middle that could fall on this, and that is assuming that he is convicted of every single count. All right. So I just want everybody to be very thoughtful about the fact that this case is not small potatoes. This is not a case where we're going to end up with, I don't think, a not guilty verdict on all of these counts by any stretch of the imagination. We already know how New York juries relate to this, all right, relate to Trump. We've already had at this point circumstances where he's been found liable in the E. Jean Carroll case. The jury there did not buy what he was selling. And I'm going to tell you right now, I do not think a New York jury pool is going to be at all favorable to him. Also, there's going to be a means by which the court, of course, through jury selection, and the attorneys are going to whittle through the potential jurors here. And they all have to take an oath, as jurors always do, to consider only the facts that are presented in the courtroom and nothing else. So let's get this guy. Bye. I love banning people in real time. It's just so much fun. All right. I'm going to tell you all that we're going to have to see how this all plays out. I am pretty well convinced that we're going to have a guilty verdict on this by the beginning of the summer. So that case is upcoming, and I'm just going to point out a couple of other things here. All right. This morning, Trump is threatening the daughter of Judge Juan Merchan on Truth Social. We do not yet have a gag order in this case. Alvin Bragg has asked for one related to the jurors. This particular set of allegations by Donald Trump, again, I just have to say, this is just a sign of how uncontrollable he is, and also of his mental decline, because attacking the child of the judge who is overseeing your criminal trial is possibly the dumbest thing that you can do as a criminal defendant. This is not something that is going to push us in the direction of, a safe and secure judicial situation for this judge. We all know what happened when Trump threatened Judge Engoron and his law clerk in the New York civil fraud case. It's stochastic terrorism. And I'm just going to, this person's going to, bye. I'm just going to tell you all that I think that there is a really serious safety consideration going on here that will probably result in another gag order. And I have to remind everybody that the appeals court in New York State upheld the gag order that was entered by Judge Engoron. So if a gag order is entered here about clerk personnel, families of the judge, anyone related to this case, jurors, the prosecutors, if there is an order entered to this respect, it's going to be upheld if it's challenged by Trump. It is, it's just really wild in many ways to watch this, because there are plenty of circumstances in New York State where criminal defendants in the mob, for instance, threaten prosecutors, threaten judges, and they were locked up immediately between the moment that they did that and trial. So we have been dancing around all of this, and the real question right now is what the end result of this is going to be in this particular case with regard to Trump's statements. Okay, final question today from the Patreon feed. Again, reminder, if you are not yet a paid subscriber, you can head on over there. Here comes the link again, and become a paid subscriber at patreon.com/resistance live for as little as $2 a month, and ask me questions before every broadcast. We had a question this morning about Trump's competency to stand trial. So this will be a little bit of a review for those of you who've been here over the last 7 years. But I want to remind you that there are two different things at play here. There are issues related to insanity defenses, which only apply in the case of certain crimes. Okay, so I want everybody to be really clear on this. There is no insanity defense to the falsification of business records. Okay. You can't go in for any crime and be like, I was insane. I didn't know the difference between right and wrong, and get off. Okay. Or be sent to a mental institution for the criminally insane, which is what more frequently than not would happen. Okay. That is not the way that this works. All right. There is an issue in every criminal trial about whether or not a defendant is able to assist in their own defense. And there are arguments to be made that if someone is so mentally incapacitated that they cannot assist in their own defense, they are not able to stand, they're not competent to stand trial. I'm just going to tell you all, I've said this before, but I'm going to repeat it here because we have so many new followers here on the broadcast, that Trump is not going to make this argument. Okay. I have to remind everybody he's a malignant narcissist with sociopathic qualities. For a malignant narcissist to admit, actually, it's not even, it would like literally never happen. But I just want to make it clear. Trump, as a malignant narcissist, is not going to allow his lawyers to make an argument that he is incompetent, that he is not competent to stand trial, that he is so mentally incapacitated that he can't assist in his own defense. That is not going to happen. All right. I am not concerned about this. I am not worried about it. However, I will say this. Okay. If you have not seen the clips of the press conference that he gave yesterday after the trial date was set, I would encourage you to, at the bare minimum, go look at the coverage of it, because he was not even able in that live press conference to avoid making really serious gaffes. That he said something along the lines of, we can't have an election in an election year. There were other points of confusion that just didn't make any sense. And many of this, these glitches, for lack of a better way of describing it, that we're seeing in Trump on the campaign trail are now like really readily apparent in real time. And I'm just going to point out something. He has not done a campaign event since he clinched the Republican nomination in terms of the electoral votes. And there are reasons for that. Okay. And it's not that he doesn't like the campaign trail or that he doesn't enjoy being in front of crowds who throw their cultish adulation in his direction. It is about the fact that the more that he is out in public, the more impossible it is to ignore his very obvious and accelerating mental decline. So while I don't think there's any way in which there's going to be an incompetency argument here at any of these criminal trials, I do think that folks should be very aware of the kinds of things that he is saying. And I will just add that the Biden-Harris campaign, as of some of the statements they issued yesterday, like very ferocious, is pulling no punches about his quite obvious inability to exercise logic, remember who he's running against, make statements that actually like are full sentences. They are done with messing around with this. And I think that's a good thing, because I think that the more that we see of his obvious decline on video, the less that it is whitewashed by mainstream media, the harder it's going to be for people who identify as like traditional Republicans to vote for him. Okay. I know I said that was the final point, but I was wrong. I want to point out, we talked a little bit about the Ronna Romney McDaniel situation at NBC yesterday. There's a meeting this morning of NBC and MSNBC executives about what to do about Ronna McDaniel. And I know that there are lots of people here in the comments and lots of followers here who've been advocating for lack of a better way of putting it, a boycott of MSNBC and NBC. And I just want to say one thing about that. If you are someone who engaged in that over the last few days, you have missed literally every major anchor of the network on MSNBC attacking and calling on the carpet their parent company. It has been a thing of glory to behold. Like Nicole Wallace yesterday was flawless. Joy Reid went in on this like nobody's business. And if you missed Rachel Maddow last night, I strongly suggest you go watch the first half of her broadcast, because she dedicated a full 30 minutes to this, and it was ferocious. Literally staring into the camera and telling the leadership of NBC that it was okay for them to realize that they had made a decision, and the wrong decision, and they would actually be able to redeem themselves by changing course. It was perhaps because it was put in the context of rising fascism, fascist movements, the attachment of Donald Trump as a fascist candidate to one of the two major political parties. Just absolutely flawless piece of journalism on the part of Rachel Maddow. And it really put into context that Ronna McDaniel's role, as we all know, was not just, the tacit endorsement of Donald Trump as a Republican candidate. It was she was an active participant in the big lie, an active participant in the fraudulent elector scheme, an active participant as recently as like several weeks ago in endorsing the absolutely fraudulent claim that the 2020 election had not been fairly decided. And she is a fascist enabler without question. And what Rachel did last night was incredible. And so I strongly urge you to all go see it. My bet is that Ronna McDaniel is not going to have a contract by the end of today, but we'll see. Okay, we'll see. And as I mentioned yesterday, Ronna McDaniel is already a material witness in one of the prosecutions against Donald Trump. So, very significant 24 hours of legal developments here. Of course, if we have any breaking news between now and tomorrow, I will be here live. I haven't mentioned yet, excuse me. I haven't mentioned yet today that we do have our upcoming program called Truth or Fiction, which is a media literacy, disinformation, and inoculation and democracy protection program. Starts on April 15th. You can register for it at GaiaLeadershipProject.com/truth-or-fiction. Strongly encourage you to get in on that if you want to learn how to combat disinformation online and on social media. I am so grateful, as always, for our Patreon subscribers. If you are here, you are new here, please don't hesitate to hit the subscribe button on this YouTube channel, to hit the thumbs up, drop me a comment. If this program served you today, if it taught you something new, if it helped you to assimilate so many breaking legal news stories that are underway right now, let me know, because we're going to be here, as always, 5 days a week, and an extra bonus day on Sundays for our Patreon subscribers, with everything you need to know to get through this moment in politics, law, and activism. All right, my friends, I will catch you online between now and then. I will see you here live tomorrow at regular time, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern. And I wish you all an enjoyable Tuesday in the midst of all this chaos. All right, see you then. Take care, everyone. Bye.